And gentlemen, welcome back to my channel Philosmos, where everything philosophical is discussed. Now today we'll be talking about whether or not we can control our attention. So the video is titled, Can We Control Our Attention? So this is an ongoing discussion actually. This actually started with the first video that I did about this subject, which was titled Neuro-Existentialism. So now for fast forward from that, I did a video based on ego, free will, and determinism. So it's a previous video that I did from this one. So just watch that video to get a bit of a context. So I ended off that video by asking the question whether or not we can actually control our attention. And Nick saw that as a vital question actually to further create more understanding in the free will versus determinism argument. So before we tackle that issue, we must first define what attention actually is. Okay, so consciousness and attention, although they are akin, people may think they're this one and the same thing, but they're not actually, because consciousness can be seen as like an ever-pervasive presence, that houses the present moment. And then attention is like the spotlight that shines its focus on an object, an experience, a feeling, or a thought, whatever the case may be. So attention and consciousness exist in the same umbrella, but they're not the same thing, and it's very important to distinguish the two. So the question would fundamentally be whether or not we can control where we shift our spotlight of attention to, or on. So that essentially is what we're asking. So in tackling this question, I'd like to dive in terms of neuroscience. I would like to look at it from that perspective in terms of the brain, because the brain is that one organ, that gives us a better understanding as to what portions of actions, are within our control, or whether things are just happening automatically. So there are two systems that are actually recognized in the brain, and it's the automatic system and the reflective system. So system 1, system 2. So in system 1, which is the automatic system, right, that deals with things that are more effortless, knee-jerk reactions, things that are unconscious, things that reside in the subconscious realm, things that are brought up based upon associations. So if I told you right now to think of a pink elephant, or I told you not to think of a pink elephant, automatically your consciousness or your attention is going to focus on the elephant or pink elephant, and that had nothing to do with your volitional control, because that was just, it happened, it was effortless, it just popped up into your consciousness. And many other things can happen like this in response to, like, almost, I think, the limbic system. And so these are like decisions that are like automatic, like if a car drives right past you, your automatic response is to move away. There's hardly any contemplation, which leads me to the next point, which is the reflective system. And this one requires deeper thoughts. It's more self-aware, and it's more reflective and contemplative. So these are decisions, coerciously, that could affect us long term. So in essence, this is somewhat of an echo of Libet's experiments with the experimenters instructing the people who are participating in the experiment to lift their thumb, and then when the readiness potential was realized in their brain, they realized that the readiness potential in their brain, in terms of the neurological pathway being fired into moving their thumb, that actually happened before the conscious awareness of it. So then that was taken as proof, evidence that we are operating through determinism. But through Peter Tay, he's shown quite well that there's indeterminism actually realized in the brain, that the brain actually has quantum components to it, which then could redefine this whole conversation that we're having, because if just one portion of the universe is indeterministic, then that affects the whole grander scheme of things. So in terms of attention, right, we necessarily cannot focus, okay, our attention on contents that is pre-chosen, or like, for example, what I mean is the things that we're exposed to. If we look at our immediate environment, if we look at the choices and thoughts that we have in our mind, all of these are reeled out without our involvement, in a sense. I cannot necessarily control what's in front of me. I can move to a different destination, in which in that destination there'll be different variations of things around me, but I cannot necessarily control the content that I view with my physical eyes and my inner eyes. Inwardly, I cannot necessarily control the thoughts. I cannot control the feelings that I'm exposed to. But nonetheless, attention, right, is like a spotlight. So if it's like a spotlight, there are myriads of things in which you can pay attention to in your immediate environment. And the spotlight of attention can focus on a tree. It can focus on a car. It can focus on the road, you see. So it's not that it's controlling what it can observe, but it has influence in which objective experience, let's say, it can focus on. So the reason why I mentioned this is because there was also an experiment that was done in terms of kids. I'm sure like you've heard of it or you've seen it before, where a group of kids were sitting on a table, and then the experimenter like placed a marshmallow and told the child that you've got two options, right? So I'm going to leave this room, all right, and I need to go and do something. So I'm going to leave this marshmallow here. You can wait for me, and then I'll come back and give you two marshmallows. But you can wait, but then if you feel like you're waiting too long, then yeah, you can just eat the marshmallow. So of course most of the kids couldn't resist the temptation and they ate the marshmallow, but there were groups of kids that actually decided not to eat the marshmallow, that they actually decided to wait, so they could delay the urge, to act upon that temptation. And this they discovered was the kids that were able to make that kind of decision were able to focus on something other than the temptation that was placed upon them, like placed before them, I mean. So there's also echoes particular sentiment that we can shift our attention to different things to observe, and then that in turn can modulate a different outcome. So free will as well. There was this article that I was reading, and it's a good way to have a structure of defining what free will is, because there are many definitions that people are operating on. Some are appropriate, some are inappropriate when we're talking about like the relationship that it has with determinism and all. So what I found out was that there are three conditions, that can basically form what we term as free will. The first condition is the ability to choose otherwise. I think that is one aspect of free will. If we had to rewind the clock and go back to the Big Bang and then watch every single thing manifest and unravel in terms of evolution, every single thing that we did, could we do otherwise? Like if I had to rewind time and go back to when I was 15 and I don't know, there was a specific moment in which I chose to go to the movies with my friends or to go with my family to a restaurant. So if I had to rewind time, will it be that 100% in succession rate I would still choose to go with my friends? Or if I rewind the time, may I have gone with my family to the restaurant? So because indeterminism is realized in the brain, then the brain could have chosen otherwise in previous circumstances, based upon the neurological pathways and how they were formed and all that kind of stuff. So it is true as well that it could be true that reality itself is quite indeterministic, in the sense that whatever happens, we could have chosen otherwise. But it's a very difficult thing to state, because if all you had was relevant information that was at your consciousness, if the neurological pathways were shaped in such that you were going to act in that way regardless of any other circumstance or any kind of stimuli, then people would say, no, you could not choose otherwise. That choice was destined, and it was final, and there was nothing that you could do about it. So that's the counter argument. And then the second condition for free will is the one to basically choose what one desires, or control over your desires. And so I think this one is definitely one that many people who ascribe to free will use, but it's quite tricky, because if we had advanced technology and I could probe a certain section of your brain and infiltrate it in a way in which I could impose a certain desire, so that anytime I said something or I pressed a certain button, it would trigger in your brain to want that specific thing, right? And then you would unconsciously act on it. Like, let's just say I pressed a button that made you want to eat an apple. I press that button and then you go out and eat that apple, so then that kind of demonstrates that, there's no control here. You're not controlling your desires. That's totally out of your control. That's modulation of the chemistry that's going on in your brain. But you still acted on the desire. It's that whole concept that I mentioned in the previous video in terms of soft determinism, right? So you were still acting on your desire. So in a way, you're controlling it by acting on it. You are the one who determined it. You realized the desire and you acted on it. So in a sense, maybe I won't utilize the word control, but you acted on it, so that was within your volitional will. So in that context, it's very difficult to see what's outside one's will if we had to look at it from that perspective, from soft determinism's perspective. And then the third condition for free will is the responsibility, or the being responsible to reason, right? Well, we human beings, we're capable of reasoning, right? We're capable of looking at different options. We're capable of justifying our actions and explaining our certain actions and giving moral interpretations of specific behaviors, So that one is something that, determinism and any kind of system that says that things are predetermined, one cannot assert, the moral intent behind a behavior. But people who ascribe to determinism are not really concerned with what ethics or morals or reasons one could hold. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, because we're nothing but a result of a biological process, and that biological process is predetermined. So whatever actions that we take, the morals, the morality, the ethics entailed in that is of no concern. But the strange thing about that is If one alters any kind of morality system or ethics or justifications or any kind of belief, that in turn alters behavior. So then, would we then say that that behavior would have been realized on a biological level, if the reason, if the moral reason or the ethical reason were not there? So are biological processes happening outside of our cognition,